Today's focus area is cyber and sports. As always, our guests today bring a wealth of experience in security and will be providing their insights into the subject. So let's work around the table and do some introductions. So Ben, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Ben Morris, Group Head of Cybersecurity at World Rugby. Been here for now 16 months. First time really working in sport. I've got about 15 years experience working across tech and cyber. Probably seen all of it. So, I'm very interested to dig into the subjects today and provide my insight.
So, thanks, Ben. Giles?
Hi, I'm Giles Thornton. I'm Head of Information Security at the Premier League. I've been here about 3 years. I'm probably a little behind Ben, so probably 12 or 13 years in security overall. Prior to this, I've been around a range of assorted household names, but again, this is my first role in sport specifically.
And finally, Kam.
Hi, so thank you. So Kam Karaji, I'm the Director of Cybersecurity and Risk Management for the NFL, the National Football League. Been with the organization since probably, I'd say, October last year, so only a couple of months. Probably similar to Ben, I've never had experience in cyber in sports, so this has definitely been an insight once I've got on this side of the fence. Background, 14 years as a police commander, and then after that had over 10 years within cyber and security.
So thanks, Kam. Okay, so now we're all introduced. Okay, we'll come to you first for your question, Ben, please, if you don't mind.
Yeah, perfect. So I guess the first subject I'd like to really cover off, because I think it's really important, not just for the sporting organisations we represent today, but all sports really, is the misconceptions when it comes to securing major events. And that was an eye-opening thing for me. So I guess I'll kick that off to really explain what was eye-opening for me. Was twofold. One, we have to secure our own organisations. We've got internal staff, internal systems we use, and a lot of people don't think about that. They think about a rugby match or a football match or an NFL match, and they think about it's just a game. Actually, no, there's a lot of complexity that comes into that. So you've got these pretty sensitive systems with a lot of sensitive data around players, staff, whatever you name it. And it's our responsibility on this call to come in and really review that and keep them secure from bad actors. And I think the other thing that really surprised me was how interconnected things are now. So, you're talking about all the events that we run within our own organizations, particular venues that we don't really have any kind of oversight of, really. We're trusting that they're doing the right thing. And the challenges with that is you're talking about all the IoT, all the systems, all the contractors, all the suppliers that have access to these venues. And it just requires one little gap in that and it ruins all of our days pretty much. And that really was a shocking revelation to me, going, I have to secure these venues to put on the best game possible for our fans and the spectators of it. And, we're trusting that the suppliers are doing a good job. So, the complexity of the role is very well misunderstood. It's just to kind of summarize my thoughts, it's the internal view, keeping your internal organization safe and secure so it puts on the best game possible. Then we've got you need to really broaden your horizon and have real good stakeholder management with the venues, because you have to rely upon what they're telling you, and you have to do that trust but verify model, going, okay, you're saying this, but let's really test this. And that is extremely time consuming. And I think the challenges at all sports is we don't have big teams. We've got small teams that we're working with here. And if you're running a major event, you're talking multiple venues. You've got the World Cup coming up this year in the World Rugby. 8 venues run across all of the UK, and these venues haven't really run this type of event before. So I think that's the big thing for me, is the complexity that comes into running a major event and considering cybersecurity.
Giles, your thoughts?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think if we look at it from our sort of member club's point of view, that complexity that goes beyond cybersecurity. So any given match day, just because someone's in charge of the cybersecurity aspect of it, they may also be looking after the IT operations aspect of it, where they've also got to tie in with broadcasters. What about the local police? What about how are you managing all the IoT? What happens if there's a failure? All the drills that come before it, that when you're putting on and this is where it's different between Ben and I, when you're putting on a match week on, week in, week out, I should say, it has to be a drill. And, the big teams that are owning their own stadiums and doing it all the time have that down to a fine art, but they're also religious about getting it right every single time, and that's what gets you that high quality product. But they're also the diversity of what people are working with, that no one has a massive team like Ben says, and also how old's your stadium? Are you directly doing PCI DSS? What that point of sale aspect, the stuff that can impact like on the day match operations that are directly revenue affecting, and trying to mitigate for that kind of thing is hugely difficult for people, I think.
Yourself, Kam?
I'll kind of go gel both Ben's comments and Giles' comments into my response. I think both what Ben and Giles says actually will kind of shape my answer, is because we need a more of a holistic approach to security of these stadiums. Because what we're doing is, I think people have a overemphasis to say it's all physical security when it's not. There's a cyber part that plays a massive part in this. But what I've had to go through a bit of a challenge is creating the relationship between physical security controls and cyber security control. So, if we had a bad actor, we can potentially, that bad actor can use IoT devices within the stadium operations and drop down the turnstiles. Well, if the turnstiles drop down, we're going to have a mass array of fans coming in to the stadium or off the stadium. That's going to cause a public safety concern, and people are going to get hurt. So I think that the biggest point is that, for me anyway, is to create that relationship. And that's where we started hearing a lot more from the board to say, okay, this actually makes sense now, because cyber was really underplayed, and or call it IT security, whether these stadiums have those controls or not, it's the people around this call now, we're ultimately responsible. So unfortunately, we've had to create these relationships for people to listen. So yeah, that's just one example. We've had this similar thing within the NFL where a bad actor has hacked into the screens. A very alarming message goes out on the screens, and guess what? We have fans going haywire, they're a bit concerned, they get scared, and we then can't control the fan environment because that's happened. So yeah, it's I think for me it's that holistic approach, a holistic umbrella.
Ben, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think echoing Kam's thoughts on this, that was a learning experience for me, and I think it's critical now if you're delivering cybersecurity, not just in sport. I think anything which has a physical presence, you have a real joint up approach to physical security. It was one of the things we set up a working group with physical security for major events, which does have local police, it has the Home Office and other key stakeholders across the UK, because I don't feel there's any world where cybersecurity doesn't touch the physical elements now. You're talking about access control at venues. Yes, the physical security team and validating the entry and exit of participation, fans and stuff like that. But if those systems go down because somebody's hacked into it and disrupted it, nowadays all of the physical security controls are dependent upon cybersecurity controls. So you can't do it in isolation. It's impossible. And it's what Kam said. You really have to, focus on the risk element. What is the risk of if we did have a cyber attack? What is the physical security kind of BCP plan to make sure we can safely secure the venue? And some of the things that we're considering part of our planning and preparation and readiness is, if there is that, do we have to shut off the match? Do we have to turn things off? So yeah, I think Giles and Kam have pretty much echoed what I thought, and this is why it comes into complexity. No longer are we IT security? We've got the cyber hat, but now we have to think all of it. We have to think about, the physical security, the broadcasters, all these elements. These are new to cybersecurity. This cybersecurity in itself is a new industry overall. It's only been coined in the last 10 years. And we're now coming to it and really trying to explain to people everything's interconnected. So you can't just ignore us and put us in a cupboard somewhere and expecting IT security to just work. No, you have to get us involved in absolutely everything. And yeah, it's challenging because everybody's got their own alternative motives. You know, physical security just want to crack on and deliver. Your broadcasters are like, just leave us alone. We just want to broadcast the match. It's like, it's not that simple anymore, guys, because you have to consider cyber now. What if the broadcast, like Kam said, if they defaced it with some hacktivism or something like that? You know, it's our brands at risk here. And it's absolutely catastrophic if something goes wrong. So, yeah, try not to scare people a little bit because you've got bright people that are in charge of it. But, you know, that is the challenge we're facing is we can't be blindsided. We're just IT. No, we have to be across everything.
So, thanks, Ben. Okay, Kam, we'll come to you next for your question, please.
Thanks, Rob. So it's a bit of a long-winded question, but I'll kind of shorten it down, so I do apologize. So how can sports organizations effectively balance the need for enhanced fan engagement through digital platforms and increasing amount of cybersecurity risks because of the amount of data we hold? So in plain English, cybersecurity risks, data, and fan engagement, all those three pillars that we look at, right? And I think it goes really well to how Ben opened up. It's about the data, right? And we have so much data, not only from the players' perspective, but for the clubs, for the organization, as in the internal organization, but also the fans as well. Now, we then look at these individual buckets of data, and we need to provide a reassurance blanket on each individual one. So if something what Giles said about PCI, right, as an example, I want to pay for a sweatshirt, I've gone to a fan shop, I've gone there, I paid for it, I've used my credit card to do that. Well, how's that data going to be managed by the sporting organization? How did the merchant get their money? How is my credit card information safe? But we go a step further, the players, I'm pretty much sure that Ben and Giles would probably have the same concept, is we have all the health data. We have all the health data, the next of kin, the emergency contact, what kind of ailments or concerns or injuries they may have. What does the medical history look like? Well, that in itself can be used in a really harsh way for creating this brainstorm of media issues, right? So if that gets leaked out in the media saying player A has a dislocated knee and the next match coming up, player A is not going to work, well, guess what? That has a connectivity to the betting and the integrity of the games, right? And then you'll see this disadvantage being caused, goes in the media, and this has a knock-on effect not only for the brand, but for the player, for that kind of information as well. And then, as I said, we've gone back into the stadium operations as well. If the stadium operations, their topography diagrams, their network diagrams, if all that gets leaked out, then how is that, how we get people, terrorists could have an access to into that. We looked at the Ariana Grande incident that happened a couple of years back. The topography of the stadium was leaked. They found out where the fire exits were, and that's when they put that incendiary IED devices, because they can see all that information coming to life. So I think those are the scary things, like what Ben says, but there's another part to this as well. How do we reassure people? I think that's the main thing. And for us, we've gone a step further, is that, okay, we've got cybersecurity awareness for us, our staff, our third-party engagements, but we're now putting this onto our ticketing platforms and the platforms for fan engagement, our applications, to say, we are now keeping you safe. So having a disclaimer saying this is what this means. If you go ticketing updates and it doesn't come from a relative source, then please don't trust it. So I think for me is increasing that awareness through active engagement to say, we will reassure you the data is safe. But you've got to understand, Rob, that there is a hell of a lot of data.
Giles, come to you for your thoughts.
Yeah, it's definitely a pain we feel is and a responsibility we have to take incredibly seriously. So it's something we're really getting into at the moment is how we really deal with the complexity of that, because the moment you're a global brand and you start spreading across the world, you get into also the complexity of like local data protection compliance. Some of them aren't mutually agreeable, so you have to deal with how you're going to deal with those conflicts. And I have to agree with Kam. The proactive engagement approach is the way forwards. We always had the best response where we lean in and help people, and we operate in a slightly different environment in that we obviously have to also trickle down a lot of best practice to the clubs because of promotion and demotion. It's not a fixed audience, so we're always dealing with new teams coming up, teams going down. What about the trickle down of knowledge and best practice to the championship, to all the way down league football? And we're expected to set that standard, but also help other people achieve it. So it's not just a single fan base of the Premier League that we then have to care about. There are fans all over the world who just will get involved with us for whatever reason because they generically love football, and so it spreads our use cases quite thin as well. Realistically, I think that there's going to be an enormous amount of sort of technology and automation having to be pointed at this. Platforms like data security, posture management, automated data governance, looking at how you can automate the compliance and governance around AI solutions, because that's where everybody wants to go, is how can we bring AI to that fan engagement? How can we make it so that you're getting the most from it? And AI can help us do that. And if we're not going there, we're losing a competitive edge. But so we're constantly trying to think of how we support the business around that, enable them to do it almost seamlessly. And the answer has to be specific technology solutions, because you couldn't hire enough people to keep up with AI at that in any way whatsoever. And that's our next big data security challenge around that data, I think.
So, thanks, Giles. Ben, your thoughts?
Yeah. I think from my perspective, the challenge that we face when it comes to data is it's that we're, as cybersecurity, we are the protectors of the data. And then you have another part of the organization which is generating revenue from that data. And they often become in conflict because we're naturally saying, no, this is the data, we need to do this. And like Giles said, we have regulators, we have lots of other custodians making sure we do the right thing for the data. Naturally, when it comes to stuff such as medical data, you have to be really, really strict in regards to what you're doing with that. What's your retention on that data? The challenge that we're facing, and I think every other sport, is we're collecting more and more data every single day. And I think that's also driven by expectation of the fans. Nowadays they expect real-time updates on fantasy leagues and tables and all that kind of stuff. That doesn't just happen automatically. Most of the time is you got massive rafts of data. You see the broadcasts of every single game. There's analytics of every single player, how many minutes they've run every single game. Then the broadcasters expect that real time because they want to put it on their dashboards where they're doing all this kind of stuff. So the amount of data we're expected to gather and surface to the public has grown exponentially. Then, from a player perspective, particularly World Rugby, we're trying to make the game safer. How do you make the game safer without having the data and understanding the data? So we have to crunch a lot of numbers very quickly to understand, like, oh, this is what is going to impact concussion. So this is when we have to think of the HIA process and what kind of medical science and what's the research. My biggest concern when it comes to data is usually not how we're using it, because we know how to use it. We've been going a while, and I think that's fair to say for the NFL and Premier League. We know how to use the data pretty well. Yes, we're still learning. There's better technology, and I think we can probably do it quicker. My concern is the third parties that we don't really, we have a degree of governance and control over the third parties, but do they care as much as we do? And that's my concern, is nowadays it's the access to that data, and are they keeping it as securely as possible, because that's the big concern. If the data gets on the web for whatever reason, if there's a breach, and we're like, we're cool, it's not happened to us, but our data's out there, they're not gonna point the finger at a third party. They're gonna point the finger straight at us. So, you know, ultimately, from my perspective, it's having more governance over the third parties and really keeping on top of what they're doing with it, and really holding their obligation to making sure this data is secured properly. But it's exciting also. So that's the doom and gloom about data. It's like, oh my days, how much data we're getting, all that kind of stuff, massive data lakes. I think it's also exciting for fans, because now we're talking about data and augmented reality. When you go into a stadium, it already knows what you want to drink. It'll already have it pre-ordered at your point of sale device. You just crack, you know, you go to one of the bars and you get your drink and your food. It's all automated because everything's on an app nowadays, and it's got your own personal profile. The custom experience is going to get better the better we understand the data, and the game will be more exciting. And the whole ecosystem around data is all focused on the fan, to making sure the information is available on their fingertips and all that kind of stuff. So that's the exciting side of data. But then everything that Kam and Giles have said is the concerns of that is we're collecting all this data, making sure that we're robust and using the right technology to keep that secure.
So, Kam, anything to add to it?
No, I think I agree with both Ben and Giles. I think just having, you know, I think it was something what Ben said is having, you know, we're the people who protect our data. But I think we go a step further. We ultimately sometimes become the custodians of that data. And then if anything were to happen, it's not that third party or the fourth party that was handling that. It is you as that sporting organization. And unfortunately, like what Giles said, you know, that there are frameworks in place that's going to come back and bite us if we're not careful. So I think it's not just awareness, Rob. I think it goes a step further. We really need to make people feel accountable. If this is the data coming in, we are ultimately accountable, and what we do with it, we have to have a fair usage with it. So now I think I kind of resonate with both Ben and Giles on that.
Okay, Giles, we'll come to you for your question then, please.
Sure. So mine's probably even longer than Kam's actually, but I'll summarise at the end as well. As sports organisations increasingly rely on technology, ranging from player performance analytics to fan engagement platforms, what are the biggest cybersecurity blind spots in the industry, and how can they be addressed? So I think realistically, my question sort of follows on from Kam's. We've got all this data, and then being paranoid people we are that work in security, what are the things we haven't thought of that we should be losing sleep about?
So thanks. Okay, Kam, we'll come to you first.
Okay, so I think one of the biggest things for me, and coming into this industry, I did find that there was some alignments from my previous roles. And the one thing that we don't pay as much interest in is insider threats within our organization. So, and I say this quite explicitly. The reason why is I think we all have data loss prevention mitigation strategies in place. We all have classification of that data as and when it comes into the organization. But we sometimes lose the visibility on how what we do with that communication method, right? So are we sending sensitive data out, which are commercial data, which is sensitive to us, to other third parties that don't need to know that data? The other part of that is, will that the information we get from players, teams, and stadiums, are we doing something to that data? Are we sending this to media? Are we causing some kind of media frenzy out here? Are we actually thinking about these? Do these individuals are going to play something to do with the betting industry? So, as an example, once our NFL season finishes, which is a massive game, which is the Super Bowl, after that we have two smaller events, and those are when players get assigned to individual clubs. Right now, from an internal point of view, our business people and our sports representatives, they will know ultimately where individuals are going to be, what teams are going to be picking up what players and all the rest of it. Now, it's something what Ben said about, fantasy football. There's also other types of leagues, other type of betting things in place saying player A is going to sign up to that organization, and they have all this data there to say, well, actually, it's going to happen. But what if our internal members of staff do something to leak that data? How do we keep a hat on it and make sure that doesn't get leaked out? So I think for me, insider threat, it's a big thing, and I think something that we always need to stay on top of, really.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, that's what surprised me the most when I joined sport. I guess a misconception is that just a heavy reliance on technology now. I don't think we would be able to run as a federation without technology. Just thinking about like game systems, Hawkeyes, medical science, analytics, whatever it may be. And with that reliance on technology, I think it becomes more emphasis on the security of that technology. So, I think the biggest blind spot for us is verifying that these new technology partners we're bringing on board are actually as secure as they say they are. It goes back to the data point. If they get compromised, it's not like, they're going to get a slap on the wrist and probably have, penalties when it comes to contracts. But from a media perspective and reputation, it's going to be our necks on the line. And it's probably similar to the chaps on the call. We're not talking about a couple of dozen. We're talking thousands of suppliers we're dealing with. And one part of that puzzle, if that goes wrong, you got a real big problem. And then this is where it gets really complicated. What about the fourth parties? What about these third parties that you're dealing with? What about the fourth parties they're dealing with? It might be Bob in a shed somewhere, just connecting to their database that it got our data in. So that's the biggest blind spot I'd say for World Rugby is the fourth party piece. Is we have quite a robust process in place to verify suppliers that are onboarded. We have standard questionnaires and assessments and audits and stuff like that about critical suppliers. But what about the suppliers that the suppliers use? And that's what we've seen, just to put it a little bit more real, is a lot of the incidents we're seeing isn't directly targeting us now. Because it's like, they're not an easy target. They've got good, good foundations. They've got good walls up to stop these cyber attacks. Third parties, again, we're probably, a lot of the sporting partners use the same people. So naturally, they'll make sure they've got good security. Then it goes back to, I have no idea about the fourth parties. Like, how far down the chain do we want to go? Because you can go fifth, fourth, all that kind of stuff. It gets a little bit wild. That's the big blind spot for me, is like, what are these fourth parties doing? Who has that? To Kam's point, like, is one of those really disgruntled with World Rugby or NFL or Premier League, and they're like, what, they've got this supplier that we're working with, they've got a direct API to a database within World Rugby. Tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to just put some malicious code on something, or maybe hack a mailbox and send over a malicious invoice, or do something really suspicious and try to go under the radar. That's the stuff that keeps me up at night. That's the stuff, that's the blind spot. And how can we address that? That's a good point. And I think it's not really just for us on this call to do it. I think it's a broader industry question. And I think it comes down to regulation, making sure that people who have direct integrations and relationships with partners with sensitive data, they have to prove that they have good security, and not just a third party, fourth party. And if you don't, what's the consequences of having bad security? We've got these frameworks in place. We've got governments now stipulating policy around good security, but it's not really enforceable. And I think that's how you change it is, if you are dealing with real critical stuff, when you talk about medical, PII, PCI data, you really have to know your stuff. And it's not just the responsibility of the third party dealing with, it's actually the suppliers they deal with. So yeah, that's my perspective on that. That's the biggest blind spot when it comes in bringing new technology.
Giles, your thoughts?
Yeah, obviously agree with both. I think the thing that surprised me coming into the industry was the sort of, I hesitate to use a load of management speak, but the holistic risk environment, that it's all so interconnected. Like, picking up what Ben said around, I bet a third of our suppliers overlap with Ben and Kam. If I had to finger in the air it, knowing that there are different technology partners out there, and we all supply different at different levels, plug into each other's sports, and then the nature of the way that the clubs have to interact and that data flow through us or not to other third parties, you just think there's got to be a level of risk aggregation in the system there that you can't see as one organisation. One bank couldn't see the risk aggregation across financial services. And to Ben's point, it does take someone outside of it to go, hang on a second, who is the supplier that turns up at every single major sporting event globally? That's strange. Let's do a bit more due diligence around that. And it's where I'm very keen on sort of cross-sport collaboration to be able to gain some visibility like that. It's not that we're going to come up with a register overnight, but if we're all trying to push forwards and get some good practice in place, and if we all come at it from the same direction, the suppliers will have to fall in line. We have to vote with our feet and make those things happen until there is regulation that supports it.
Thanks, Giles. Okay, so finally, I do have a question for the panel too. So how can the fans protect themselves from cyber scams related to like ticket fraud, merchandising scams, fake streaming links? What's the kind of best practice you advise the fans out there basically to make sure they don't get caught out by these sorts of scams? So come to you first, Giles.
Thanks. I'm trying not to dish out any generic cyber advice, but if it's too good to be true, it is. You need to be going to the legit websites. You need to be buying it from the place that is making it, is supplying it. And that's not, I make it sound simple, and it isn't always apparent. There have been quite complex cases of people getting in the middle, ripping stuff off. But if it is too good to be true, it is too good to be true. Like, not suddenly overnight, merchandise isn't half price. That doesn't happen. So that it goes back to what Ben said at the beginning, the trust but verify principle. You've got to go there. That said, how can you underappreciate how committed and passionate fans are and how much they want to get involved? How much do you want a ticket to that major sporting event? It's just a scammer's dream, because the pressure's internalized from the person. So psychologically they're in. They want to buy into it being true without them even having to put pressure on. It's really hard. But I think, I'm sure Kam will pick this up, but that positive engagement by organisations has to be there. You have to start flagging how people can flag this stuff for themselves and make the smart choices without it being overly complex.
Thanks, Giles. Ben?
Yeah, I guess what else to add into that? It's the basic principles. So, yes, ticketing, like if somebody's offering you a 50% discount on a really well, on a sold out match, come on, that's not going to happen. Like, let's be real. And, I think that the common thing really, a lot of this stuff, if there is tickets available at last minute, Ticketmaster will announce it. Like, I'm just using Ticketmaster as an example. Go to legitimate source. The last thing we want is fans to get scammed out of their own money because they've fallen for a fraud. And, I think nowadays a lot of these platforms do provide the availability of good security. So, if I'm just going to use, I don't know, our website, we say when you log on, enable 2FA, add multi-factor authentication, use strong passwords. So it's that consistent prompts of good security, but there's very little we can do in regards to enforcing that to a fan to make sure that they go the right way. We have to explain it as practitioners and to our teams, going, these subtle prompts, we're not doing it because we want to just be that person to interrupt your day. We want to keep you safe. So, if you do buy a ticket, we want to make sure that somebody doesn't break into your account and steal it. And if you can't make it, you also want to make sure you sell it on a legitimate website, so you don't lose a ticket and you lose your money. So all this stuff that Giles has said, go to the legitimate source, put in good security. You are a prime target for these people because it's good, serious money going around here. So don't feel like, oh, they're never going to target me, so I don't need to enable my, SMS prompts when I log in, or I don't need to keep my ticket safe. I can go onto public Wi-Fi and log onto all my accounts and all that kind of, best practice, which, we preach every day in our organizations. But don't be under the illusion that you're not going to be a target. These criminals are targeting fans because they know it's lucrative. So yeah, that's my best advice is, if you are getting these prompts on these websites to set up good security, do it. It only takes 5 minutes and you'll sleep a little bit, better at night knowing I bought a really well sought after ticket at a Super Bowl, as an example. Oh my God, you don't want to lose that ticket. So I'm going to make sure I'm going to keep that. So use the tools to your advantage to keep you safe online.
Good done. Finally, Kam.
Yeah, a really nice segue, Ben. So thank you. I think for me, it's about going that little bit a step further, because what we've found out is that these people who try and scam our fans use that degree of urgency. They create that urgency. So, I run up to a massive game, give you an example of Super Bowl. We know there's a halftime show. We know there's going to be 80,000 fans. We also know there's going to be activations, fan activations of smaller pubs, smaller venues around, even watch parties. So, we'll say the watch party is completely free, or, please turn up to things. So what people would do is they would use that caveat to say, well, guess what, these watch parties are taking place, and start charging people, creating this sense of urgency. Say, well, you're going to be part of it. We can give you a reseller ticket, might be 50% more. And because people want to be part of it, they will be lured into paying for it, right? And I think this is the fine balance, right? When we build up the sport, build up the momentum of the sport, and people who are loyal to watching it and supporting the teams, that's amazing. But when we've got hacktivists who actually sit on this information and really point and pinpoint that actually the urgency is caused there, let me go in and straight and pick that up. So things like verifying sources, if it is Ticketmaster, you must get it from Ticketmaster or directly with your sports organization. But we do something a bit different, is when we give out the tickets through our third party, we're sending out some advice with it to say, if you've got a QR code on your phone, which is your ticket, just be mindful of that QR code. Verify that before, re-download the QR code 30 days before the game, so they know that nothing's been changed, no infrastructure has been changed. So we're trying to have some positive engagement towards the fan, and actually passing on that information from a transparent perspective, saying, this is what we've seen. We don't want you to get lured into this trap. Please think about these things when you're attending games. So we mix in cyber security and physical security, because we want to make sure the fan leaves their house to attend the game, and by the time they get back home, they're there, they've had a safe, fun time, and the game's done in a good, safe manner. So yeah, it's more of, like what Giles said, I hate holistic, but more of a holistic approach of fan safety and fan experience.
Thanks, Kam. So any further points you'd like to add?
Not for me. I think, I guess a lot of topics we talked about today might scare people, but be hopefully infused by the knowledge across the group today. And I think, we speak to all over sports globally, and there's a lot of passionate people keeping this stuff. So although it's ever evolving and there is, growing cyber threats every single day, we're all over it. We're deploying the best technology, best practice, to Kam's point of awareness. So just more to say, yes, you might have heard some scary stuff today, but you have really bright people keeping this stuff safe. And yeah, a lot of the I guess the sports we're representing today, and globally we do put out awareness, and there are people to talk to about this stuff. So just morely to say, although it might be scary stuff, it's like, oh my God, should I be concerned? No, because you've got bright people looking after your data, your safety, and ultimately, you shouldn't need to stress about this stuff because that's why we're employed. That's why we have jobs, because ultimately, you have bright people looking after you. So that's how I wanted to leave it, in more of a brighter spell going, we've got you covered, guys. It's stressful for all the 3 of us on the call, but we do have you covered, so it's all good.
Cheers, Giles. Okay, great. Well, we shall leave it there. Well, it just leaves me to thank Ben, Giles, and Kam for taking part in today's podcast, and thank you all for listening.